Okay, hello everybody. I would like to invite all our panelists turn on their webcams. We are, I think, ready to kick off, right? Hello Ilkem, it's great to see you again. Yes. Hi Niklas, it's good to see you. Yes, we have our opening speaker, Yavuz Günalay, the dean of our faculty, is also here. I know, yes, Çiğdem Hocam and Selcan Hocam are also coming. Hello, Selcan.
Hi to everybody. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Çiğdem Hocam is also here. It's with great pleasure to have all of you here on board. I know that it's been, a very hectic period for all of us. We have all sorts of online communication and webinars. And we are here hosting another one for the Europe Day. Today, as we all know, is Europe Day, and we are going to celebrate. We're going to criticize. We're going to talk about it extensively. I don't know which verb is more accurate at this moment. And we have a great, panel of experts on this particular topic from different parts of Europe and Istanbul from different institutes. So I would like to welcome again everyone and all the participants, all the audience. It's a nice, sunny Saturday in Istanbul. I don't know how is it like in Sweden and Spain. I hope you're having also nice weather. And well, here in Istanbul, we can't go out. Unfortunately, we are all under curfew. We are at homes. But, it's, at least we have this opportunity, the digital technologies, right, Yavuz Hocam, to get connected and, to talk about the matters, the issues that are important, politically today. I don't want to take too much time of yours. Because we, as I told you, we have real experts on these very important topics of the EU and European politics. I would like to give the floor actually to Yavuz Hocam, Yavuz Günalay, who is not a political scientist, who is coming from a completely different background. He is the dean of our faculty. And maybe I would like to give a couple of words to him. He for sure has some, welcoming words for us. Hocam, the floor is yours. Yavuz Hocam, would you like to share your thoughts with us?
Thank you, my dearest Professor Ebru. Yes, I am the Dean of Faculty of Economics, Administrative and Social Sciences in Bahçeşehir Üniversitesi. And on the name of my institution, I would like to welcome all the distinguished panelists and dear participants to this very special event, the 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which is so-called the EU Day. As Ebru mentioned, I am no expert, neither knowledgeable about the topic, but I was honored to talk in this special event where Turkey is also part of it for about 60 years. So this is not the first international meeting of something, but it's a long-term gathering of European Union, so that's why I think it's very important. And in this sunny internet day, I don't want to take a large bandwidth of your talks. Instead, I would like to point out maybe very specifically about this new union, which is internet. Internet is about an age for Turkey it's 27 years, for Europe it's about 30 years, and it is now becoming a new unification. I'm not sure, I'm not good in language either, if it's the right term, a new unifier of nations, people, and generally, these type of events were done in large meetings as a gathering of people, and I think it was important for EU. It's one of the policies of EU which starts as an economical gathering, but now becomes more and more social and political awareness and unification of people, and it starts in Europe, where is the oldest civilization on earth. And now, instead of gathering people because of this pandemic, we are trying to make it more and more apart, using remote connections, which was an optional issue before, but now it becomes a necessity. And I'm wondering this, and from the other angle, I'm seeing that internet is not only used for social gatherings, but we are seeing internet is used for education, internet is used for medical purposes, internet is used for business collaboration. So this new phenomena now somehow replacing this issue of social gatherings. So I wonder, this is my kind of question, if you dare to answer to the panelists, if this internet becoming a catalyst for European Union in the upcoming years, or it could be a separator, because I know, and I'm happy to use this opportunity. I know European Union is paying a lot of attention to mobility. We have Erasmus students, they come and collaborate with Turkish students. Our students go other societies and see the lifestyle, see the importance of different opinions, and broaden their knowledge. So I don't want to take too much of your valuable times and leave the bandwidth to the panelists. And again, thank you for all joining this event, mainly proposed and carried on by our members of International Relations and Political Science faculty members, the head of the department, Ebru Hocam, thank you very much for holding this event, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much. I really like this idea that band is yours. Thank you very much. It's always like an engineering perspective that adds a lot to the political scientist debates. Thank you, Yavuz Hocam. I would like to move very fast to the panelists and, introduce with a couple of words our panelists. We have Çiğdem Naz here, who has been an academic for a long time, but here, both being an academic and with her another head, she has been the Secretary General of Economic Development Foundation of Turkey for a long time. And she actually has been dealing a lot with different aspects of the European Union during both her scholarly, research period and now in her professional career. And then we have Niklas Bremberg, who happened to be an old friend of mine, and it's a great opportunity for me to have him here. He is a professor at Stockholm University. And he has his PhD in political science, and he's been specializing on the European Union matters for a long time, on European neighborhood policy, foreign and security policy, and so it's great to have him here. Thanks, Nicholas, for coming and being with us. And we have Ilke Toygur. She's an analyst at Real Instituto Elcano in Spain. And she has been leading for a long time, again, as a political scientist. She has been dealing with long time on, democracy, development, and European Union affairs. She has written on, populism, on Euroscepticism, different aspects of the European integration, and she will definitely talk with her head, with her hat of being in Spain. So she will definitely give us some insights from, the European Union and Spain during these very hard times of COVID-19. And lastly, we have our dear Professor Selcan Öner. I don't need that. I need to at least introduce Selcan Öner to our students, but from the audience, we have various guests at the audience. So Selcan Öner is a professor at Bahçeşehir University for a long time. She has been a professor of European Union, and that's why she deals a lot about nationalism in European Union, identity politics, populism recently. So she will share her views about these matters, in our panel. So welcome again, all. Before, moving the panel to Çiğdem Hoca, we'll start with her. The question in the very beginning that we put forward is, during the COVID-19 periods, the European Union has been challenged not only of the health security related matters, but also from different aspects, at different levels at the EU policy making. The Union has been criticized for not really devoting the required attention and, providing the help that the Union members needed. This was like a criticism that was put mostly, forward in the southern part of the European Union, southern member states, which suffered extensively during the COVID-19 crisis. And we all were puzzled whether the European Union is, going through dire straits, that it's going to break up one day or soon or not. So that's why I would like to open this panel with this question, whether there's going to be a retreat in the post-pandemic era, of course, not from a fortune teller's perspective, from all analytical perspectives, but, whether the EU finds ways to take the corona pandemic, crisis management as an opportunity to heal, those, parts of the Union for its more sustainable future. So this is a big question. Of course, we don't have the answers right now, but at least we'll try to make a contribution with our perspectives, with our understandings of this big question. So Çiğdem Hocam, let's start with you. Please, the floor is yours. What do you think? How would you share with us? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I thank you also for organizing this very timely panel webinar and for giving us the floor. The question is, of course, very fundamental and very topical. Retreat of the EU or retreat of the EU. We know that the European Union has been under many challenges for some time. Especially since maybe the 1990s, maybe we can trace it back to the Maastricht Treaty and its rejection in the Danish referendum. And then we have seen a number of setbacks for the European Union. And now we also see that it is being challenged by many circles. We have seen, for example, people like Nigel Farage, who has been a member of the European Parliament, but who has been one of the main campaigners for Brexit. And he has said that Brexit will also bring the end of the European Union. We have seen, again, politicians like Marine Le Pen, who didn't want to speak on television, where behind her was a EU flag. She didn't want to speak with the EU flag. We have seen also people like Steve Bannon, for example, a political strategist working for Donald Trump, who made meetings with ultra right-wing parties in the European Union. So there have been many challenges, both internally, inside the internal politics of the member states, and also externally from other actors, especially with the rising power of Russia, the more sort of assertive foreign policy of Russia in the near regions in the neighborhood of the EU, rising instability in the south, in the Mediterranean region after the Arab Spring event, and also the United States under Trump no longer acting as a friend of the European Union. We can also add maybe China as a new factor with its, again, economic power, especially gaining influence in, again, in especially nearby regions and in also Europe. So we are seeing developments that are not only maybe peculiar to the EU, but that or also creating a change for the whole globe, and also challenging the established institutions, the established systems. So we can also maybe see it as a crisis of democracy, as a crisis of the political system to deliver goods. And recently, of course, we have seen these crises also influencing the EU. We can talk about the crisis, the constitutional crisis, where the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe has been rejected in two founding member states, in France and the Netherlands. We have then been faced with the financial crisis of 2008-2010, and then the refugee crisis of 2015-16, and also recently the Brexit issue, which has again created a very important challenge for the future of the European Union. Of course, I mean, we don't have time to go into the details of each of these crises, but I would like to maybe note that all these crises, maybe the EU has emerged from these crises and is able to continue its union. However, each of these crises has left certain marks on the EU, has left certain impact on the European Union. And also we can talk about maybe a growing rift between the north and the south of the Union, which has become more apparent, especially after the financial crisis, and also has become again newly apparent with this COVID-19 crisis also, as you have also suggested in the opening remarks. We can also maybe talk about a growing rift between the east and the west of the Union, especially with countries like Poland and Hungary that are accused of moving away from the values of the European Union. So it's also a crisis of EU values, while the EU is trying to propagate these values in countries like Turkey or the Western Balkans that are candidates to the EU. In current member states of the European Union, we see again a contradiction of these fundamental values, and in a very paradoxical way maybe, the EU is also giving maybe power to such leaders as Viktor Orban, and cannot really prevent the current authoritarianism under such leaders. So we are also seeing these dilemmas and paradoxes. In the recent case of the COVID-19 crisis, I think, of course, one very maybe bitter memory that Europeans have, especially Italians have, had been in the first days of the COVID-19 crisis, when the first death started to be reported in northern Italy. It was February 22nd. And then following this sudden spread of the disease, the pandemic in Italy, we know that Italy made an appeal for help from the Emergency Response Coordination Center. And then this was for medical supplies, medical equipment, for masks, for ventilators, which would be needed to deal with the disease. And the European Commission then forwarded this appeal to the other member states. However, none of the member states helped Italy in the first days of the COVID-19 crisis. And this, of course, left a bitter memory I think, in the minds of Italians. And it led to some questions such as, I mean, why do we need the EU if the EU does not come to our help in our desperate days, or in our desperate struggle against this disease? And then starting with, I think, March 17, we have seen that the Commission began to become more proactive and adopted a number of measures which it proposed to the member states. And then we have seen that the EU took over and was able to take a number of measures to deal with both the health aspects of this crisis and the economic aspects of this crisis. So just maybe very briefly, we have seen, first of all, banning of non-essential travel to the European Union. We have seen a stockpile being let's say, accumulated by the EU. Some tenders were opened in order to deal with this sudden increase in the need for masks, protective gowns, ventilators in the health sector. Then we have also seen some economic measures being adopted. The EU relaxed its state aid rules, and so that member states were able to provide some assistance to the economy, especially to companies that were faced with this crisis. Also, the financial discipline of the Eurozone was also relaxed, and so that the member states would be able to engage in borrowing requirements. And then we have also seen that the EU initiated a response for a global response, trying to accumulate some, again, resources to deal with the crisis. There were also funds which were made available to countries, candidate countries and countries in the vicinity by the Team Europe initiative. So the EU was able to maybe initiate its responses. However, in the first days, the inactivity and the lack of support from the other member states maybe questioned one of the basic premises of the European Union, which was solidarity between member states. The EU already had a solidarity article, an article about solidarity, that when one of the member states was faced with a crisis situation, either maybe a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, then the other member states would come to the help of the countries. And there was also a crisis response mechanism, a civil protection mechanism, which was envisaged. And then we have seen that, for example, the member states began to help each other. France, for example, donated 1 million masks to Italy. Again, medical equipment were sent by Germany. Other countries sent teams of doctors. They were able to take in patients from Italy and Spain after a period. However, of course, this is a crisis which can have longer-term consequences. And we see also some economic forecasts which are published by the IMF or by the European Commission that, again, talk about a serious shrinkage in the economic power of the EU, a contraction of European economy, like -4-5 growth for the rest of the year. So an effort will be needed maybe to recover from this crisis. And this became, again, an issue of serious disagreement maybe among the member states. This letter of the 9 member states regarding the corona bonds was quite important. They demanded the mutualization of debt in the euro area. However, this initiative was rejected by 4 of the member states, by Austria, Finland, the Netherlands, and Germany. They said that this mutualization of debt will not be acceptable. And another solution was found in a meeting the Council had on the 23rd of April. And here they decided to come up with a recovery initiative. And about 1 trillion euros would be made available for the member states that were having a difficult time with the effects of the crisis. However, there are still some maybe points which are not really very clear at the moment, whether what will be the balance between grants and loans in this recovery fund, and whether some conditions will be attached to the fund. Again, going back to the memories of the financial crisis of 2010, we have seen that especially for countries like Greece, the conditions which were imposed in order to make an economic recovery were quite harsh. And also maybe they also created a certain weakness in terms of especially the southern member states for delivering public services to the population. So it was also maybe a questioning of the neoliberal doctrine of fiscal discipline, which also crippled the member states' maybe capability to deliver health services, to deliver other public services social services to the EU. So maybe I think it also led to a questioning of the wisdom of the euro area. Should it be all about fiscal discipline, or should maybe social provisions have a more important role in the future of the euro area? Because I mean, when we, for example, read some criticisms to the EU from the left especially, we also see that this aspect of the EU is also criticized, that the EU has always maybe supported business, supported capital, but not worked enough for the average citizen, for the citizen on the street, to increase the social provisions of the EU. And we have seen maybe a rift emerging between the stronger economies of the EU that are also able to deliver for their citizens, that are able to maybe, let's say, strengthen the public services. However, those on maybe mostly the southern member states who are also having a difficult time because of increased borrowing, because of increasing budget deficits. And this creates, again, a rift regarding the state capabilities between member states of the European Union. So the increasing fragmentation in the European Union and this disagreements about the future of the European project may create some cause of concern for the future. But coming back to this question about whether this crisis will create maybe let's say, a retreat of the EU or a retreat of the EU, I'm not totally pessimistic about the future of the European Union. I think there are huge problems, both, as I've said, related with the internal dynamics of the EU, but also from external challenges faced by the European Union. However, this crisis has also shown to us that it's not possible to deal with today's questions, today's problems, by nation states by themselves only. They need transnational cooperation. They need transnational networks. They need agencies such as the European Union. And I think it will maybe paradoxically lead to maybe a strengthening of the European institutions in the future, because one thing this crisis has shown us is that the EU did not really have any binding powers in this area in dealing with public health situation. This was not a policy where the EU had been granted competences from the member states. So I think maybe it may lead to further competences being given to the EU for the EU to take swift action. But also I think we have to rethink the competences of the EU, the budget of the EU, whether or not it is enough to deal with all these challenges. And we have to, or the European Union has to engage in maybe a redefinition of the responsibilities, sharing of powers, division of responsibilities between the supranational level, the national level, and the subnational level. So we need increased interoperability maybe between these different levels of governance in the European Union. So my last point will be that we need the EU, we need a better functioning EU, we need a better division of responsibilities within the European Union. So we need the EU in the future, but this will be an EU which has to be reformed, I think. Reform will be inevitable in order to have a better functioning and a EU that will be able to swiftly respond to such challenges in the future. So let me end it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Çiğdem Hocam. Thank you very much. You actually, addressed many different, points related to the lack of solidarity or, questioning the solidarity in these very hard times. And apparently the crisis is not like a very recent phenomenon. The history of Europe has been full of crises. The entire story of Europe started with a crisis, right? In the aftermath of the Second World War, like 70 years ago. And they have overcome various challenges. Some have strengthened the union, some have given some damages, but like Brexit, like the Corona bonds that, you rightly mentioned, these days it's being questioned, differently in different member states. And I really like in the end that the point that you raised, interoperability at different levels. So this is, I think, a very, very important aspect. So maybe we can move to Nicholas, who is gonna give us like some insights from the northern part of Europe, which you know has been going through the Corona period and from different you know levels. So yeah, Nicholas, the floor is yours, please. And just before Nicholas takes the floor, I had put here the chat board. Please, if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to write your questions or comments. We have this chat part there. Or in the end, in the Q&A session, you can raise your hand like this. There is an icon over there, and you know we'll try to pick up your questions and yeah, in a more interactive way. So yes, Nicholas, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please. Yeah. Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Are you? Excellent. So again, yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm always happy when I think about Istanbul and the people and the sceneries of course. The weather in Stockholm is also nice. It's sunny here. At least that's something, right, in these very strange times. So, Ebru, you before the webinar, you asked me to kind of provide a little bit of the northern perspective on this current crisis, and I'm happy to do that. I just before I'll do that, I'll just say that I think that Sidem made a very nice kind of overview of what kind of got us here and a little bit the history of this current crisis that has so much affected kind of European politics and to some extent pushed the development to also going. So I mean, so from one perspective, obviously, kind of just the possibility that the EU is still muddling through is, from one perspective, an achievement, right? That it's actually due to the.
Sorry, Nicholas. Nicholas, there's most of the audience says, please raise your take the mic close to you or increase the mic volume.
Is that better?
Yes.
Excellent.
Can you hear me better now? Okay, perfect. No, so perfect. No, so I think that is one thing to perhaps to keep in mind, right? That the EU is possible to muddle through in a sense is something that is perhaps an achievement. But I also think that is something that we need to take into account in our discussion because that sets very much kind of the limits of what EU can somehow achieve. And perhaps also a little bit on our expectations when we move forward and think of what can kind of come out of this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think there are kind of two obvious dimensions to this current crisis. One is economic, and the other one is related to public health issues, obviously. And they both of these dimensions have a crisis management kind of aspect to them, and also perhaps a much more long-term constitutional aspect to them. I think Sigdem has touched upon these two dimensions in her talk previously. So obviously, when it comes to the kind of the economic crisis that is now a consequence of countries not only in Europe but also across the world that are shutting down and therefore obviously is hampering economic activities across the board. That needs to be dealt with obviously by countries but also the EU in concert, right? And obviously the whole debate on how to set up the kind of the recovery is something that has exposed again this north-south divide within the EU. Of whether we are going to kind of do this together with some kind of mutualization of bonds, or if it's rather a much more kind of individualistic approach where we rather go for loans, even though we do it within kind of the EU setting. That is a very big question that is not only relating to this crisis, but it also reveals this broader idea of what the EU is. I think from a northern perspective, and again, Sweden not being a member of the Eurozone has an interesting position here, since Sweden has come out as one of these frugal four countries that are basically saying no to kind of mutualization of bonds or a much more common kind of approach to economic recovery, rather than saying that this is basically going to be loans, guys. It's not going to be common debts, basically. And I mean, this is not related to the COVID-19 especially, but we saw a few days ago the ruling from the German Constitutional Court questioning the kind of the ability or the capacity of the European central banks to go on with its quantitative easing program, the PPSP. I mean, that if we don't really know what's going to happen with that, obviously. I mean, on one hand, it challenged the supremacy of EU law. It questions some of the legal kind of the basis upon which the legal order of the EU rests. But I mean, if that kind of runs its course, we can find ourselves in a position where the ECB and other EU institutions will be much more kind of hampered in its ability to act in crisis and come up with much more of these kind of common responses to economic crisis, right? But we don't know, right? But still, so I mean, from the northern side, we see these kind of moves, whereas as Sigdem also said, right, from the south, Spain, Italy, and France, we see a very much different perspective. I'm sure Ilke will also provide some insights on the Spanish position here. But that's obviously one thing that is going to be debated further down the road. And I mean, in my mind, it's very hard to see that the EU can really change track to kind of really kind of embark upon development where it kind of focus much more on social provisions and redistribution in terms in economic terms without serious constitutional changes. And that is going to be very difficult to achieve, I think, at least in the foreseeable future. So this crisis is maybe it's going to kind of keep on modeling through in economic terms, or it might even accelerate some of these tensions that we are seeing in this field, right? But again, it's hard to tell. And the other aspect of this crisis, which is public health related, I think Sigdem is absolutely right in the sense that the kind of the fundamental characteristics here is that this is not really kind of an EU competences, right? It is supposed to be the member states' competences, and the EU can basically support member states. It's not necessarily that the EU has too much competences of its own to react. So this kind of the idea that we are kind of that the EU has failed member states. I'm a little bit hesitant to go there since the EU was not set up to do this kind of things or kind of solve public health related crisis necessarily for EU members. But who knows what can kind of come up in terms of beefing up certain crisis management structures on the European level as a consequence of what we have learned from this crisis. Again, I think from a more Nordic perspective, I think it's interesting to reflect on the kind of the variety we see also among Nordic countries when it comes to dealing with this pandemic. I'm sure you're all aware about the kind of the Swedish exception to handling the COVID-19 crisis, right? That the Swedish government has not opted for kind of across-the-board lockdown. Many of the schools, not universities, but schools have remained open. People are still free to kind of go outside. There is no general curfew. Shops are open, restaurants are open, even though there are restrictions in terms of you cannot gather in public spaces more than 50 people, for instance. And the public health authority is really kind of pushing the recommendation for social distancing. The whole idea, for at least from the beginning, has been that Sweden, we need to kind of protect the capacity of our health system and also protect the risk groups, basically. That seems to be not really working since the death toll is much higher in Sweden compared to Denmark and Norway and Finland, even though the healthcare system has not been overwhelmed at this point, at least. Stockholm is the region in Sweden that has been particularly hit by the COVID-19 epidemic at this point, but now we're seeing obviously other parts of the country also picking up in terms of cases. But again, I mean, look at Denmark. Denmark has taken a much harsher kind of, if you like, approach dealing with the COVID-19. I think it kind of reflects again on differences between these countries in terms of governmental structures, basically what the government can do in a crisis like this and what the government wants to do, basically. Whether it kind of leaves much more leeway to its expert authorities, or whether it kind of takes this as a political crisis that needs to be solved by political crisis management. And I think the same thing goes a little bit for Norway, even though Norway seems to be a little bit in between Sweden and Denmark in this regard. But again, it's interesting to reflect upon these differences, and again, Sweden in many regards stands out, even though I don't think that kind of the strategy is too different from what many other European countries want to achieve at this part of this phase of the pandemic. Basically, slow the spread and get the healthcare system cope and scale up and change its capacity. And for me, I think that has been an interesting. I think that is basically what I would like to say at this point. Maybe we can come back to these kind of two dimensions, right? Whether we should expect more in terms of public health capacities or cooperation within the EU as we move forward when the crisis is over and start debating lessons learned. But I think the other part of this crisis, the kind of the constitutional / economic cooperation part of the crisis is going to be there, and that I don't really see that the EU is going to be able to really change its course, right? We're going to probably be much more in the muddle through phase, even though that can be an achievement in itself, right? Considering the major challenges that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas. That was like a very broad perspective into what's going on in the Scandinavian part of Europe. Well, this is something that we have been, teaching in our classes, with many references to the Swedish case from different aspects like social welfare states, democracies, and, trust in institutions, so forth and so on. So I think if, there are some students I know of ours, so this is going to be like a real example from an insight from Sweden, at least. So thank you very much. You covered like Denmark, Sweden, the differences with reference to German case, and I think so. From that extreme, we are going towards another extreme to the south, right? So this is a typical cleavage, south versus north, and I would like to give the words to Ilke, and I'm looking forward to getting your insights as well from Spain and from what's going on in the southern Europe. Thank you. Yes, the floor is yours, Ilke.
Thank you very much, Ebru. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure of mine to spend Day of Europe talking about Europe like we have been doing for the last 2 months. Actually, I will start with the question that came from Yavuz Hoca, if internet is a catalyst or is it a separation power. Actually, I think this is the busiest period of my, I don't know if I can say my career, because this has been like, in 2 weeks, I have like 8 meetings, appearances on Europe Day. I think if it was physical, I would be here in Spain with my colleagues from, Spanish colleagues, celebrating it in an official ceremony. So maybe we can take this as a positive note to start with. And I would like to also say Happy Europe Day to our colleagues and students that are listening to us, because I have seen in the chat box in the beginning, like hi from the pro-European generation. So I was very happy, and I would like to say hi back to them and say Happy Europe Day to everyone. Going back to the serious business, if it's retreat or retreat, for me it's a transformation, like it has been in all the other crises that we have been talking about. So Chidam Hoca went back to the Maastricht Treaty, but also the 21st century of the European Union has been full of crises. And if you go to the media spots and coverage of these crises, especially in these countries that are anti-multilateralism, or they are looking forward to a reshaping of the world order, I would like to put Turkey as an example in this folder as well, you will always see this coverage of if the European Union is in a decline, if it is failing, if it is going to dissolve, etc., etc. So I think that we need a perspective there so that we know that 21st century, even before, if we also go back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but if we even look at the near future, the last decades have been full of very challenging crises, and the EU has been coming out of them different, stronger in some cases, but mostly different in case of intergovernmentalist powers or further power to supranational institutions, etc. So before moving forward with my analysis on the South and Spain in particular, I would like to underline a bit this issue of perceptions, expectations, and competences. Because this crisis once again made me realize, well, how do you perceive the European Union and what do you expect from the European Union very much depends on where do you live. This is also why we are talking about this North-South divide and all these crises in different perspectives. Because your expectations from the EU also differs depending on where you live. For example, in the case of Spain, we are seeing a very high expectation, especially on the handling of the economic crisis that is yet to come, or it's coming, let's put it that way. And if you are living in Sweden or in Germany and the Netherlands, you will see a way more hesitation to co-financing or mutualizing this debt. These are the issues of perceptions and expectations, which is also very much shaped by the political elites, since it is also a part of the public opinion, and depends on where the elites stand as well. When we look at the competences part, because that's a different part which is also legally established with the EU treaties, it is mostly what the European Union member states wanted it to be. So all the competences that exist in the European Union for the EU itself are the competences that were given, that were defined by the treaties, that went going through a process of definition by the political elite. So this is very, I think, important to underline that when we are talking about the EU and its institutions and its member states, we should understand the division of labor between them so we can adjust their expectations more clearly. Because why I'm starting with this, because when I have seen, I was also one of them, criticizing the European Union for the lack of solidarity in February, we were always thinking about the ghosts of previous crises, especially the economic crisis and the political crisis that arise from the arrival of irregular migrants. Because we have seen various occasions that some particular member states, and unfortunately they were generally in the South, they were left alone. And this has been the case in Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Italy in the economic crisis, and mostly Greece and to an extent Italy in the crisis related to irregular migration. So it was, once again, we were all alarmed, thinking that, okay, there is another crisis coming out, and the EU should be showing solidarity, because without solidarity, there is no European Union. But I think it is very much related that the reluctance in February is that the perception of, first, the crisis is not in Europe yet, so it was a distance crisis in China. Second, perceiving public health and border management a national competence where EU has very few to say. And third of all, thinking that, okay, maybe this is not going to be that dramatic for all the EU member states, so we should be careful on what are the steps going forward, because we have a full agenda for 2019-2024. Think about it. The Commission took office in December 2019. There was Christmas holidays. We came back in January, and in February it was facing such a big crisis, and this is why it has also perceived this as an obstacle to its own agenda. So I think these three items are important to understand why there was lack of solidarity in the beginning and why the EU was slow in its response. Then I think, for my personal opinion, it kept it raised to the occasion, and it started to act very much in line with its competences and responsibilities. First, the European Commission and the European Central Bank, and then we have also seen the European Council. I should also underline this, that it has met 4 times since the 10th of March virtually. So it is one of the highest rates per time of meeting for the European Council. So that then from the beginning of March, we have seen that the EU was back in the States. But I should also add, again, before moving towards the understanding of Southern European countries, that for understanding the reactions and the management of crisis, both in the health emergency and then the economic crisis to come, we should understand the functioning of supranational institutions. We should understand the national interests. This is also essential for understanding the perceptions that are coming from the South and the North. And also, I think the party politics dimension in this business. And I'm sure Sercan Hoca will talk more about this, so I'm not going to get into that. But I always ask the question, for example, if the Netherlands or Germany was not going to the polls in 2021, would their governments be this tough? Would they also look for reshaping the public opinion this intensely in the electoral scene? So it is not even just like supranational institutions and then national interests, and then Çiğdem Hoca added also the subnational level in this, and then this is very important in Spain. I will get to that. But we also have party politics and the government's interests according to their party politics dimension and the position of their government. So this is, I think, something that we should understand very clearly. And when we are talking about public opinion, it is important to shape it and not necessarily hide behind it, because this is how the European project has been built. In the beginning of the project, we go and name Robert Schuman all over again. Now it's been 70 years since the Schuman Declaration. But back then, also because of the urgency of the need for political unification, the political elites mostly followed the idea of Europe way more closely than today's political elites that are mostly looking for their party politics and their interests in their national arena. I think these are the factors that we should all keep in mind when we are talking about this. Going back to the Southern Europe, of course I will be more specific on the Spanish example, but I think it's important to underline that France, Italy, and Spain, 3 of the 4 biggest in population member states of the European Union, have been also the countries that have been affected the most from the COVID-19 crisis. In Spain, for example, we have 260,000 officially informed cases and 26,000 deaths, again, recorded because of the COVID-19 crisis. Why I'm giving numbers in this? I think it is very important to understand the psychology of a government and a country when you are seeing deaths, like 1,000 deaths a day. There were a week, or even like more than a week, like 2 weeks in Spain, that we have been seeing 1,000 deaths a day because of the corona crisis. So it is the numbers are important for understanding how serious the situation is. But on top of it, the political situation in the country is also very important to understand. Let's take the Spanish case, for example. Spanish government has been established in January after a super electoral year in 2019, because it was general elections twice, European Parliament elections, and regional elections in Spain in 2019. And the government, the first coalition government of the democratic history of Spain, has been established in January. So again, the same what I was saying about the European Commission, no? That the government was established, and then boom, starting from March onwards, that we had the corona crisis and the health crisis first, and the economic crisis yet to come in Spain. So I think this is important to understand. It is also very important to understand when we are looking at the South, the attitude of opposition, because, for example, in France and in Spain, we are seeing a very not necessarily collaborative and cooperative behavior from the opposition, and it has also defined very much the behavior of the government and its expectations from Europe. And as a third step, the subnational governments and the role of regional governments, for example, in the case of Spain, have been very important in this sense as well. So with the emergency state, the control of the crisis management came back to the central government in Spain. But we have always seen issues because health management, public health is regional competence in Spain, education is regional competence in Spain, and various other issues related to border management and security forces are also regional competences in Spain. So we don't have just the European level and the national level, and then we have the subnational level that has defined very much the attitude towards the crisis and towards the expectations from the EU itself. As you have already followed, I assume that Spain already published a non-paper and put in paper in written what it has been expecting from the EU to tackle the economic part of the crisis. It has stopped using the word corona bonds because it realized that this is going to be a no-go with Germany. So in the beginning they were asking for corona bonds, but when we come to the negotiations before the 23rd of April in the European Council, they stopped using that word and started asking for a recovery funds in form of grants, if possible to the amount of 1.5 trillion euros, and also encouraged to keep on with the agenda on ecological transformation and digital transition. So Spain is one of these countries that is also still supporting these two items on the agenda. I think this is also important. And also, of course, adding to the equation the external action dimension, you couldn't expect less because you have, we have in Spain the High Representative Foreign and Security Policy. So defining of the expectations from the European Union, we also have the national situation, the severity of the crisis. We have the political thinking of a socialist and even a further leftist government, so that this digital transition, just transition, ecological transformation, etc., all the items in the agenda, and asking for grants, not necessarily for funds, because Spain is a country that still has the ghosts of the previous crisis. So I think I will start wrapping up here because I would like to end with two core messages, which I would like to also put on the table as a discussion point. The first one is that Spain also has changed the message. The South has changed the message. In the beginning, it was solidarity. Okay, we need you, let's go, and the EU means solidarity. But in the second half of this 2 months crisis management period, or now we are almost in 2.5 months, we have seen the discourse shifting to we are in this ship together. If Italy goes down, if Spain goes down, we will all go down. So it is also interesting to see that to make this change and to respond to this north-south divide, I think the discourse has been changed all in the south, but also in Spain clearly. So I would like to put this on the table. And the second thing I would like to put on the table, I think it is also very specific of Spain and it should be discussed very much in depth. It has always been a very pro-European country because Europe meant democracy, rule of law, and everything else that the Spanish society wanted to be. And Europe has always been perceived as a positive driving force in the Spanish society. So, but it was necessarily a naive pro-European country, you know. But with this crisis, we are seeing, first of all, a very big expectation from the European Union. This word expectation, I have been using it over and over again. But a second thing that I would like to underline, we have also seen a very much Europeanization of national political arena. We have seen Pedro Sanchez going on prime television over and over again and underlining the role of the European Union in this crisis. It wasn't in the form of blame shifting, because we have seen this blame shifting in various other countries, but it was literally Europeanization of national public space. And we have also seen von der Leyen in primetime television, Sassoli, we have seen Charles Michel, we have read Pedro Sanchez's article in various newspapers trying to shape also European other European public opinions, etc., etc. So I think these two phenomena have been important in the case of Spain and the South, and I think it is also important to go forward with the conference on the future of Europe and all the other expectations and redefining of competences that we might have because of this crisis. Because as I said in the beginning, and with this I finalize my talk, this is not for a decline, this is for a transformation, and that transformation will be happening with the contribution of member states, their citizens, and their political elites. So it is time to define what every country wants from the European Union and how it should be shaped depending on all of these, taking into consideration that the role it should play in the 21st century, well, also multilateralism is in danger.
All right. Well, we thank you. That was a very in-depth analysis and overview of, you know, both Spain and, you know, Italy with references to France. Of course, you know, you rightly mentioned, because we started also here in Turkey spending some, you know, time and attention on the Spanish case very recently. And what actually stays in my mind about the Spanish case, apart from all the, you know, diseases and death rates of corona, you know, COVID-19 thing, I think your foreign minister had just raised this, you know, last point that you know, put forward. Either we're gonna sink all or we will float. So it's not a single case. So we have to look at cross-sectional, across different countries, and, you know, and this is, I think the tone here is definitely not a solidarity. That was like a warning. And also self-reflection of warning, not like a warning in a deterrence case. So that is, I think that will be like one of the guiding lines for the future, you know, COVID-19, post-COVID-19 policy making at the EU level. So, of course, we'll stay in tune and we'll definitely follow what happens next. Thank you very much. A lot of points that I also put, you know, take note of your you know, speech as well. And the last thing, I think Ilke, you know, gave a lot of you know, a lot of insights or like messages to what Selcan will cover. You know, what is going on with, you know, this radical right-wing populism, you know, you know, under these days, in these days, because to us, they're like delighted from a certain perspective, because this is like a great opportunity maybe for the right-wing populism in Europe, you know, that the EU will disappear, you know, that EU will no longer be needed because it's not functioning. Is it? I don't know. Selcan, the floor is yours. Please, you know, enlighten us with this, and please, can you just turn on your microphone? It's probably it's off. I do it for you. Okay. So your microphone.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks for organizing this webinar with Yavuz Hoca, and thanks for inviting me. And I'm so glad to be here with all my friends and colleagues and professors, Çiğdem Hoca, Yavuz Hoca, and all of the professors also listening here, and my students, our students. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. So firstly, a happy Europe Day to everybody, and I would like to start with a very optimistic sentence of Philip Herzog. He says that Europe is a hopeful travel. So I studied on European identity for my PhD for many years. So that's why you know, we need to remember this comment of Herzog, that Europe is a hopeful travel. So it has a lot of ups and downs throughout history, and as also mentioned by Çiğdem Hoca and some other colleagues, you know, Europe faced with such crisis several times in its history. Another general remark about COVID-19, I also would like to emphasize that I think after COVID-19, not only within the EU but all over Europe, we understand that if somebody is ill in any part of the world, we can be all infected one day. If there is one problem, any crisis in any part of the world, it may somehow come to you in a different way as irregular migration or something else. So we understand that our fates are really interconnected with each other. So we have to solve our problems all together, which is also mentioned by the speakers, the principle of solidarity. If we come back to Europe again and the situation of populism and radical right politics, if we go back to last year in the European Parliament elections, we see that there is a rise of populist radical right influence in the European Parliament after the last European Parliament elections. Their share increased from 5% to 10% in the last May 2019 elections. On the other hand, we see that when we look at the initial responses, as we discussed also before by the previous speakers, we see the problems about the measures of the single market were challenged in this process, intra-European solidarity was challenged in this process, even export of some medical products were prevented among the member states during this process. When we look at the crisis history of the EU, briefly, constitutional treaty crisis, the recent ones, economic crisis, migration crisis, and this one are the ones that can be mentioned in the recent years. And when we look at the responses of the EU, usually we see that the EU is not ready for such crisis, because when we look at the treaties, it's just, arranged on a very idealistic perspective. If you fulfill Copenhagen criteria, you can enter the EU. If you fulfill Maastricht criteria, you can enter Eurozone. But what about what's happening after the crisis? For the crisis situations, EU is learning by its experiences and trying to find out solutions in a bit, late, a bit later time maybe, but it takes some time for the EU to react and respond in a constructive way usually. So it's not the only time. It's not the only time that's happening. And also for the migration crisis, we see that the response was usually moving towards fortress Europe, for example. Closing the external borders, protecting the external borders, and trying to leave the problem outside and externalizing migration management to the neighboring countries like Libya or Turkey. So for the first time here we have a common global other. So that's why EU has a chance to act in solidarity, although a bit late, as you mentioned, as Ike mentioned also, and also other speakers. A bit late response to Italy and Spain's request. This time, a kind of a global approach and also European approach can be constructed. And we see that recently, as it was mentioned also briefly, the Solidarity Fund at the global level was trying to be, introduced online recently this week. And also there are some internal crises already going on within the EU, Brexit, rise of populist radical right tendencies, democratic backsliding in Poland and Hungary. So they're already there before COVID-19. And also in general, we can say that EU also has an identity crisis as well. So which Europe, what kind of Europe will appear after COVID-19 is also a question mark. And especially in terms of North-South divide is widening within the EU as well. Western-Eastern Europe divide is already there because I think since 2004 enlargement, the cohesion process is still going on, but it's not functioning very effectively as well. After the crisis, we see that, for example, Merkel stated that it is the worst crisis that EU faces after the Second World War. Macron stated that we are at the war against COVID-19. So we see that, that's one of the biggest crises that EU is facing for sure. And also, in addition to after this crisis, we see that in addition to the discussion about balance between security and freedoms is on the one hand, but we have also nowadays another challenge, which is balancing economic concerns and health of people. So another balance dilemma is also in front of EU and all over the world as well. And when we look at the case of the EU, public health policy is mostly under the control of the member states. We have to remember this. And also, as Ike mentioned, in Italy and Spain, they are at the local level, and it causes also sometimes some challenges for Italy as well. If you will have time, I also would like to mention the case of Italy a bit more also at the end of my speech. EU has a complementary role in the public health system. So EU tries to encourage the countries, member states to collaborate with each other in the health policy. So it has a complementary role. The reactions briefly I may touch upon. On 17 March European Council Summit, they took some decisions on supply chains for medical equipment, provide support for research on COVID-19, and provide supportive measures to cope with the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19. Team Europe initiative was introduced, which includes supports more than 20 billion euro for the partner countries, including Turkey, Western Balkans, Africa, Latin America, etc. So, after the intra-European solidarity problem and challenge, we see that EU tries to also promote global solidarity. After finding trying to find solidarity within itself, they try to promote global solidarity as well. They may actually implement this role as well, but it's not that easy. But they try to take some steps forward in recent weeks to promote global solidarity as well in that sense. And if we go back also to talk on the border issues a little bit, which is also connected with populism and radical right, actually this situation is very good for populist radical right parties in that because they always prefer borders closed. They are critical about the Schengen area. But in this process, also EU has to think about the role of Frontex as well, for example. Frontex maybe needs to be revised again for the emergency situations because Frontex focuses just on controlling of external border control for irregular migration, but for such pandemic issue, for such an emergency issue, they are not ready how to deal with this issue. For example, when the cases appear in Italy, they stop the flights from Italy to other European countries very lately. So if it was maybe stopped earlier, maybe this spread maybe much more slower. And for now, the Commission recommended yesterday that non-essential flights are recommended to be restricted till 15th of June. So we will see these restrictions also in the coming days. So when we come back to rise of nationalism and role of nation states, we see that after the COVID-19, rather than populism, but we see rising influence of nationalism and growing importance of nation states. Fuat Teğmen and Atilla mentioned this also in their paper as Return of the Nation State. We can remember Ellen Miller's article after this, when the EU project was established, a rescue of the nation state. So EU's role, one of its roles is also rescuing of the nation state. So we see such arguments much more after COVID-19 as well. I followed one Association for Study of Nationalism seminar from Columbia University, and Florian Bieber mentioned in this webinar about authoritarian dynamics after COVID-19, deglobalization, and politics of fear. And he mentioned some points I will briefly touch upon. He mentioned that authoritarian tendencies may rise in this process. We see this in the case of Orban very clearly. In the case of Poland, tomorrow normally Poland would have a presidential election, but it was cancelled. And they are planning, they delayed to an uncertain time, and they are planning this to do it by mail. So it's a bit weird, but they are planning to do this by mail. But at the last, it's a very short notice, so somehow the postal office of Poland stated that we are not ready to arrange everything by mail, so that's why. So these are very problematic things about transparency and accountability of the elections in Poland, and also a lot of backsliding in democratic tendencies there as well. Plus backsliding in freedom of press, many parts of the world, including of course Turkey and also in Hungary and other countries as well. Polarization, they were already there, but they may increase in this process and they become more visible in this process. Deglobalization, how do we see this? We see, for example, it was mentioned by Florian Bieber as medical nationalism, very interestingly. Even we saw this in this process, medical piracy. And usually, even the member states of the EU countries act very selfishly at the beginning of the process, like the other countries of the world. And another tendency, politics of fear. We see rise of conspiracy theories rising all over social media, and they are usually also spread by far-right groups on Facebook, for example. We see them very frequently. Radical exclusionary nationalism is rising in this process as well. And also prioritization of citizenship is another tendency in this process because, for example, we see that citizens are taken from different countries and coming back to their home countries. And we see in that sense also rise of civic nationalism as well. But in the near future, we may see rise of collaboration between nation states for their national interests. So collaboration may go on, but national interests will be at stake probably in the medium term. But it's still not, of course, clear which tendency is more temporary, which effects will be more temporary, which effects will be more permanent and stay longer. We will see what will happen. About your question, Ebru, what about, especially after Brexit, the populist radical right parties start to change their rhetoric. Rather than leaving the EU, especially with the pioneership of Salvini, they are saying that we would like to transform the EU. I mean, we would like to get our sovereignty back. Rather than we will make Italy first in the EU. So rather than leaving the EU, their rhetoric started to change. And also in this process, their anti-immigrant and anti-refugee rhetoric is not very, visible, not that much. It decreased a bit maybe, but more religious. For example, in the case of Salvini, we see that influence and emphasis on religious symbols. On his post, if you check his post, you can see more cross at the back in his posts or in his photos or videos. And also he also even demanded opening of the church, and he stated that science is not enough for us. We also need religion to fight against COVID-19. So more religious symbols and discourse is also, seen more in the discourse of Salvini in this process. And also, on the other hand, how to cope with this challenge. For example, current Italian government composed of five-star movement and Social Democrats, they are discussing now giving residence permits to irregular immigrants living there and give them opportunity to work for agriculture or elderly care issues. So somehow the mainstream parties, how they will react to COVID-19 and how they will react to the policies of the populist radical right will also influence the future of populist radical right in European politics. And about conspiracy theories also, I would like to mention one more concept, probably you all heard, infodemic. For example, World Health Organization mentioned this concept of infodemic because of rising influence of misinformation all over the world. And as I told you, far-right groups are already supporting this infodemic process as well. But on the other hand, science is rising its influence, scientists are rising its influence, medical doctors become more visible. So these very different symbols are somehow clashing with each other. So which will be more predominant after COVID-19 will influence the future of Europe, European politics as well. And also if you look at the Italian case a bit more, we see that, for example, at the beginning there is no inter-European solidarity, but from China, Cuba, Russia, Ukraine, and also Turkey sent medical equipment to Italy. I talked with my former master student from Italy, and he told me that especially from China and Russia and Cuba, this support was very visible on Italian media. Euroscepticism has been rising in Italy already, even before after the migration crisis, and the main rhetoric after the migration crisis in Italy was Italy has been left alone. And we see the similar rhetoric also after COVID-19 as well. Italy has been left alone. So the responses of the EU, how this recovery process and easing of the lockdown process will go on, and how EU will react and respond to this, rhetoric will be very influential in order to, see how Euroscepticism will evolve in Italy. But I don't think that it will lead to discussions about leaving the EU, but the populist radical right will definitely emphasize more on transforming the EU, getting sovereignty back. This kind of arguments will still be very popular probably. And I mentioned you before, the local level is very influential in Italy. So it causes some challenges as well, because at the local level, when I was talking with my former master's student, he also said that sometimes it's hard to organize medical equipment and sharing of the medical equipment all over Italy, because they don't know how many masks and medical equipment they have, how many beds they have in hospitals, etc. So the necessity for multi-level governance in the EU and rearrangement of multi-level governance in the EU is, I think, very important. EU already has this opportunity, EU level, national level, and local levels, and regional levels in some countries. So it has to be reorganized somehow for these emergency situations to cope with the future challenges and pandemic in the future. If I have, do I have 2 more minutes, Ebru? I will add some few things, okay? So, thank you so much. When we look at rise of populism and radical right parties, usually theoretically there are 2 approaches. Economic insecurity increases their influence, or cultural insecurity increases their influence. Engelhardt and Norris also stated that sometimes they are influencing both of them are maybe influential in the process. Especially after COVID-19, I think economic insecurity will be more influential for the future of populist radical right parties. So if the EU cannot find a solution to the socio-economic problems, which is already there, as Çiğdem Hoca also mentioned, Commission and also IMF projected that there will be declining in the growth rates in many countries in the world, and also especially also in Europe as well. 10-point decline or 10% decline, etc. In some countries, in Italy, like in Italy. So the responses of the EU and how the new EU budget, multi-annual financial framework will be arranged in the EU is very, very important. And how the EU budget will be, transferred to different countries and to the different issues and topics. These have to be revised and rearranged very well in order to solve this problem. And also, yesterday I listened. There was a online meeting in Florence European University Institute, and the Italian Prime Minister talked at the end of the meeting, and he stated that this is not a zero-sum process. This will be, as also Ilke mentioned about Spain, this is a win-win process or lose-lose process. So we will all win this game, or we will all lose in this process. So especially he focuses on economic challenges that Italy is facing and European Union is facing, and he emphasized how these economic challenges can be overcome, and if they cannot be overcome, all of us will somehow lose in this process, he emphasized. And maybe last point, and then I will finish. Especially about the Euroscepticism in Italy, maybe last point is that without strong EU support, Italian economy cannot recover from the crisis, and also Spain, the similar case. So I don't think that it will lead to the exit discussions. As a conclusion, I listened to also the interview of Noah Harari, the historian. He stated that the future will depend on us, how we will create the new future for the world. There is a necessity for cooperation in terms of scientific knowledge, medical equipment production, and supply chain. So the world may move to a better direction or a worse direction. So this is a critical juncture, and this will be shaped by us. And as I told you, multi-level governance in the EU and in the world is very, very crucial. Collaboration between a local, national, and European and global levels. International organizations unfortunately failed in this process, so their role should be and organization and their functioning process should be improved. And lastly, I should say also closing borders may only provide short-term solutions, but longer-term solutions can be found out by more multilateralism, cooperation, and sustainable development goals have to be always taken into consideration. And secondly, transparency and strong state capacities are very important in this process. We see that the countries such as South Korea, New Zealand, Germany, who have strong state capacities and who have transparency, if their data is accountable and reliable, then people follow the authorities in a much better way in this kind of countries. But in this process, maybe lastly, populism and radical right has not won so much in this process. But somehow the reactions, as I told you, the recovery process, how the recovery process will take place in the EU will shape their rhetoric and policies in this process. So we will see how they will transform there, because usually we see that these populist right parties can adapt to different situations very easily. Like we see in the case of Alternative für Deutschland, they start as anti-Eurozone movement, but then they transformed to populist radical right party. Lega started as a regional, autonomous party. Then they transformed to anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, populist radical right party. So that's why they may change their rhetoric and discourse according to the new situation. Maybe I should stop here. Maybe after the question.
All right. Well, we thank you very much, Selcan. I think you can all unmute your, micros right now, because the floor is open to the questions. I've just seen there are many questions for our panelists, and I would like to start with Ilke, because she has another engagement right after our webinar. So she's running from one webinar to another webinar today. And I want to, first leave the floor to Ilke, if it is okay for everyone. Hakan Yapar is our student. He's like about to graduate, and he's actually extremely actively involved in all these issues. He's been, attending many seminars all around. And he is, he's still curious to know, more things, right? And that's why thanks Hakan, he asked very interesting questions. And you pointed out some questions to Ilke, right? If I'm not mistaken. One of them was about, the question about miscommunication, manipulation with data regarding the readiness of member states, in order to respond to the COVID-19, and that was, I think, a question to Ilke. Maybe you can actually say a couple of words about this, Ilke. And also, there is another question about the EU global actorness in crisis management in the future. The question is about whether the EU's role will be the same as today or not. I think this is like the fortune-telling part. So would you like to start, Ilke, with these questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. Actually, there were many, and I'm very happy that we have such an engaging crowd there. Starting from the health systems and miscommunication, I don't think it was a deliberate miscommunication in the sense. But even if the possibility of a pandemic was already included in many countries' national security strategies, for example, in the case of Spain in 2017, national security strategy includes a possibility like this, I think it was economically not possible for these countries that went out of the economic crisis very recently, had very high level of public debt and unemployment rates, to dedicate the sufficient money to their health systems, not necessarily just the health systems, but also emergency care units, because these are two different things. The welfare states allow some kind of health coverage for everyone. For example, in Spain, just with your residency, you have your right to healthcare, public healthcare for free. But this is something that the country is very proud of, but it's not necessarily equal to emergency care units and equipment that is necessary to deal with 1,000 deaths in a day. But I think it is not necessarily, if we go very much in deep, I know that we don't have time for this, but the reasons why a country was specifically affected from a crisis while the others are not affected is connected to the age average, the lifestyle of the society, the interrelation between the younger generations with older generations, for example, the involvement of older generations in the society life, etc., etc. There are so many various factors that affected the number of infected and the deaths in each country. So for me, this is a calculation and an evaluation that every country is supposed to go through, once the emergency health crisis is over. But I don't think it was the deliberate miscommunication. There are two of my favorite topics on the table right now. One is the role of Europe in the world, because I think what this pandemic has also done is to underlining the already existing trends and like even further deepening the debates on them. I think the debate on Europe in the world was already there since the election of Trump and its aftermath. And if we go deeper on this, I have various articles on this. If we go deeper on this, there's even a further intention of questioning the multilateral order, because it was an order that was designed after the Second World War and during the Cold War, which is not necessarily fitting to 21st century. So there is a bigger existential issue related to the multilateral order right now, and the unwillingness of the United States to dedicate its resources to Europe and its close neighborhood, but instead dedicating it to Asia and its issues with China. As I said, this is definitely beyond the time and topic of this panel, but I think this is a broader question that we should have already asked, and I'm hoping that the European Union will all go with its strategy to play a more important and more influential role, first in the world and also in the reconstruction of the multilateral order. Because what I personally think is that without the reconstruction of the multilateral order, we will all have the same problems about the institutions over and over again. And with the new actors in the world, we should rethink multilateralism, not that multilateralism is in decline like the EU itself, but it requires a rethinking and restructuring in the 21st century. So this is a very short answer to that. And differentiated integration, I have been personally a very big supporter of this concept in the EU. Definitely we should digest it, we should understand what each and every member state expects from the EU and how we can go further on this. But differentiated integration is an answer to many problems in the EU. It already exists. Some countries are Eurozone, some others are not. Some countries are Schengen, some others are not. And for example, in the establishment of PESCO, this voluntary principle was also put on the table, and it has worked very well, even if PESCO is definitely a very limited institution. I'm not going to get into that. But even for Turkey-EU relations, I think differentiated integration provides an answer to the problems that we have. It's another day, another panel. But I think differentiated integration should be revisited, and I'm sure it will be the topic of Conference of Future of Europe that will start in the autumn, and there will be various discussions on that. That's a concept that we should also work and study very much more in depth in Turkey, I assume. I think I will stop there. I don't know if I'm missing any
yeah, thank you very much. Well, I mean, you already covered many things. And I think it was a very satisfactory, from a personal perspective, answer as to these very broad questions and important questions. Nicholas, I see that you already answered Arda's question, right? There's like a new type of friendship just going through the chat boards, because Nicholas was just raised the question by Arda. Arda is a professor of political science in our department. And, I think you're all okay with that, with the answer. Would you like to add anything, apart from what you answered, how you answered Arda's questions, Nicholas? Would you like to add anything to that? Oops, sorry, hold on. Yeah. Yes.
Swedish case. No, I mean, I don't think so. I think what is really important here, and I think this is a main message perhaps to students and some of our colleagues listening, that, I mean, we have been debating very interesting concepts, very interesting phenomena here, even though we haven't not really got into kind of the nitty-gritty of definitions, which is going to be very important moving forward, right? I think this is what we are now seeing. This crisis is going to provide lots of interesting data and lots of interesting points of comparison for numerous interesting questions, even though obviously, I mean, one problem here at the point that we are now is that data is shaky, right? When it comes to trying to kind of compare the effects of certain measures in certain countries in handling the epidemic and the pandemic, we are still kind of moving on very shaky grounds in terms of, because where the reports on death, the reports of infection or infected is an artifact of testing strategies and artifacts of different ways of reporting in different countries. So yes, it's going to be a very kind of interesting and important kind of research task going forward, making these comparisons, trying to assess the effectiveness of different national systems and different national strategies. But it's very hard to do that at the point that we are now, right? I think another point that I would like to raise, it comes back to the initial points that was addressed by Javuz, in the sense that we are in the midst of this digital transformation, which is, I think, is very true. And obviously, we don't really know yet what kinds of effect these kind of, practices that are now evolving in terms of people working from home a lot more than before. We are having, hundreds of webinars instead of going to different places and talking to people. So we don't really know. But that, I mean, my hunch, and this is something that I would really love to kind of explore further, would be kind of the effects of this emerging digital divide within Europe, obviously. Certain countries, certain sectors are going to be much more kind of in a better position to move into this digital realm than other countries and other sectors. To me, this is something that might kind of forward divisions within Europe even further, kind of beneath the surface, right? So some countries are going to be much more competitive when we move into this digital phase, AI or robotization of labor markets and productivity and production, whereas other countries are gonna probably not be able to do that that fast. And think about tourism, right? Tourism is immensely important for Southern Europe, but I'm not sure that we can do that digitally, right? I love Istanbul. I love seeing images of Istanbul, but I want to visit it. I want to go there. I love the beaches of Greece. I love the beaches of Spain. But seeing it on my screen is very different from kind of taking a plunge in the Mediterranean. I'm sure we agree. So I think obviously certain countries and certain sectors are going to kind of respond to this emerging digital divide differently. And obviously the issue of misinformation and the way that social media to some extent has brought havoc to our national democracies, and perhaps also the emerging public sector in Europe and the European level. It's a different kind of digital divide that we might be seeing here. That needs to be kind of researched further, I think. And another thing that I think was very important listening to both Ilke and Selen was the kind of perhaps the reshuffling of the political landscape in countries like Spain, Italy, and other places, right? At least what I'm seeing, looking at a case from as Spain, is that the political right in Spain is now possibly moving in a much more kind of Eurosceptic position, which was not the kind of the position that the old Popular Party had, right? Whereas now, obviously, under the pressure of the populist right, Vox, we are now seeing the leader of El Partido Popular making kind of, not Eurosceptic, but kind of questioning certain fundamentals and certain principle of EU law or EU supremacy. For instance, when it came to the Catalan crisis and some of the Catalan politicians taking up seats in parliament. So I think that is something that also we need to kind of keep an eye on. And obviously, I think Shalon is completely right when it comes to Italy, right? The project that Salvini is embodying and envisioning is a very different kind of project for Italy in Europe than we are used to see from right kind of side of Italian politics. So I think that is also an extremely important issue. And the last thing I think is even though we have been talking about crises and possible transformation, to me the big divide is this kind of East-West divide that we've seen. I think in the end, the North-South divide can maybe be overcome in some way of kind of agreeing on an economic model that we that most country can live with. But when it comes to this issue of the fundamental values of the European Union, whether this is a community of democracy and rule of law, if that is not sustained, I think that is much more lethal to the European Union as we know today than any kind of economic conflict between different. I'm not saying that the EU, is disappearing, but I mean, if we don't get that conflict between or around fundamental values and democracy, the EU might be much more of a kind of a downscale free trade area rather than kind of much more held a community of legal and fundamental values. So I think that is something that we also need to kind of think about. But any students listening, I mean, this is really an opportunity to really think about interesting research projects, theses, and stuff. So there is definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Well, just maybe I would like to share that, definitely we're looking forward to days coming, when we will go to the beaches again, right? It's never the same thing to see them on the screens. But of course, maybe I should move to Selcan because she rightly pointed out the spillover issue. I think, spillover is what the entire European integration project has been about, right? From one sector to another sector. And based on what you have just mentioned about, what is going on in Italy, for instance, about the refugees, that Salvini and the government has just, declared that, we didn't want them until yesterday, but today we change our minds and we want to employ them in agriculture and here and there. There's I think, a utility-driven approach in this. So do you think it's detrimental to the spillover idea, always for the better and better, right? The idea of this new functional spillover that will bring in the end a peace. Do you see whether it's a spillover thing or an excessive utilitarianism for the radical right in Europe? I mean, this is my personal interest, right? My personal question. And then after your answer, I want to leave the biggest question to Çiğdem Hoca, the Turkey-EU relations, what's going to happen. So, this is the most problematic one, so I leave it to the very end. So please, Selcan, what do you think on that? And if there's anything that you want to add to the questions on the board. Yeah, let's unmute again. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. About this discussion, it seems going on because Salvini is against this idea, but the government, five-star movement, and especially Social Democrats, actually, the Social Democrats are more in favor of this giving residence permit to the migrants. So I think the discussion, it's a utilitarian approach, definitely. It's a utilitarian approach. I mean, but at least just saying that we are pro-immigrants by the mainstream parties is not, I think, the right way to challenge the populist radical right rhetoric, because usually the populist radical right are saying that we are protecting you from irregular immigrants, we are protecting our European identity, we are protecting our national identity. So somehow the immigrants are constructed cultural insecurity phenomenon. And now, actually, after COVID-19, I did not mention that, but they may be reconstructed health insecurity phenomenon as well. Probably they will be, the othering process may be even accelerated by making them health insecurity, phenomenon in the future as well. This is also the biggest challenge. But on the other hand, mainstream parties, rather than just saying that we are pro-immigrant, we are following cosmopolitan values, maybe using this utilitarian rhetoric, to what extent normatively it's the right way of doing things, but at least it may challenge, I think, populist rhetoric and migration policies in a better way, in my point of view. I mean, we will see. This is a new discussion, but just saying that we are pro-immigrant, we are following cosmopolitan values, somehow is still not challenging the populist rhetoric very sufficiently, in my point of view, before. But maybe this discussion, because also in the yesterday in Çiğdem Hoca İKV's webinar, I followed it most of it. Also, it was discussed that mentioned that I think Murat Ardahan mentioned a lot of doctors from Syrians in the EU, also in Germany especially, they were participating in the dealing with the patients, etc. So they were also part of the process as well, fighting against the virus. So these people are not only the burden, they can also contribute to the society if they can integrate it, educate it, etc. So this way of looking should be promoted and should be, of course, put forward more concretely, but with a much more concrete migration policy, rather than just being pro-immigrant policy, pro-immigrant, more open policy, open door policy. They have to put forward certain ways of finding legal migration, because also, you know, because of the aging population in the EU has to find out new solutions to it. They have to attract brains actually to their countries as well, because of the aging of the population in the EU. The EU also has to rethink of these things in this process somehow. You know, they have to, for example, even as academics, you know, when we are going to a conference, we have to take visas, and they just give us 1 year multiple enters visa when we are going there, for example. Even as academics, it's not so easy to enter the Schengen area. So this approach has to be shifted as well, in my point of view, not only towards irregular immigrants, also about legal migration. They have to provide better opportunities, and also for visa perspective, from the visa perspective, they have to change their attitudes as well. So this is a possibility for rethinking about all of our mistakes as individuals, as countries, and as EU. We have to rethink ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last word to the Turkish question, the Turkey question. We are sending a lot of, you know, aids and facial masks and intubation mechanisms, so forth and so on, to different EU countries. So I think maybe we expect that EU will let Turkey in, you know, soon, for this great solidarity that we show. So what do you think is, you know, gonna happen with the Turkish-EU relations? Çiğdem Hocam, the last and the most difficult question comes to you. Please, the floor is yours. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. I think, the Turkey-EU relationship is also related with where Europe is going to. So I think there is a lot of unpredictability surrounding this question also. What will be Europe's place in the world? Will it be able to continue its pledge to multilateralism, to international cooperation, to liberal worldview, or will it be affected by the democratic backsliding, let's say, which we are seeing throughout the world? And what will be its relations with China, with Russia, with the United States? So we are maybe in a process of redefinition of also Europe's place in the world and the whole international system. Again, one important thing is, of course, the EU's capability to adapt to change. And we have already talked about the digital agenda, the new Green Deal, where the EU wants to pioneer maybe the changes in the international system. But there are also some criticisms even to the leading economies of the EU, such as Germany, that they may be left behind in this transition, the adaptation to, for example, artificial intelligence, to 5G networks, to these autonomous cars, etc. So we are in this process of rapid change, not only in the political sense, but in the technological sense, economic sense. So we will have to see where Europe stands in all this transformation, especially owing to the slowing down of the economy and the loss of, let's say, maybe the balance tilting towards countries like China in the global distribution of wealth or income. So it's quite challenging process. Regarding Turkey's place, of course, as you have said, Turkey sent some, let's say, equipment to countries like Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom, the United States. So we can say it was maybe a move, a soft power, let's say, a sign of a diplomacy, maybe a public diplomacy on the part of Turkey. However, of course, I don't think it will have really long-term consequences. There are more structural problems, I think, between Turkey and the European Union. There are reasons, of course, emanating from the EU itself and also reasons emanating from Turkey. On the one hand, maybe we should also look at the EU and its enlargement process. So we have seen, especially in the last enlargement, 2004, 2007, and then Croatia, I think it led to some second thoughts on the part of the EU, especially with regard to this democratic backsliding we have seen in the case of Hungary and Poland, and also problems, again, associated with corruption, with rule of law in countries such as Bulgaria and Romania. And then we have also seen an increase in populism and anti-immigrant rhetoric. And we have seen, maybe funnily enough, that one of the most important points which were, let's say, propagated in the campaigns, Brexit campaigns, were actually not only immigrants coming from outside the EU, but immigrants coming from East European countries to Britain. So this backlash, nationalist backlash, nativist backlash, has been associated also with this enlargement process. So I think one important priority for the EU at the moment is not to let any country inside the EU before they are really prepared for the EU, before they have made a really transformation, not just a superficial adaptation to the EU criteria, but really a deep sort of transformation. And it's very, very difficult in this present circumstances, especially in Western Balkans. We see a lot of let's say, dilemmas about their connection with the European Union, and also some maybe, of course, resentment against the European Union. For example, in Serbia, recently they have given medals to Chinese doctors who have come to help with the COVID-19 crisis. So there is also a creeping, let's say, power shift also in these regions around Europe. So I think Europe has maybe in the past tried to shape its neighborhood, like the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, Turkey, etc. But now it is losing this power to make any changes. So it has become more reactionary maybe to changes that are taking place in the neighborhood of the European Union. So rather than maybe transferring its own values, now it is faced with new contenders for power in its near neighborhood. So that's a major challenge. And I think it has been also a story of losing Turkey for the European Union the last couple of years. We have seen a transformation in Turkey with the new, let's say, with the new presidential system, with also increasing power in the executive, with problems emerging in the independence of the judiciary, in media freedoms, etc. So Turkey, which is a country which is very closely aligned with the EU, through the customs union, through its quite close trade relationship, economic relationship, has actually moved away from the European Union in terms of political allegiance, in terms of values and norms. So this has been an anomaly, and I think it has been a failure on the part of the EU, a failure of this project of transformation in Turkey. So I think on the one hand, it has been also something that the EU should talk about or think about and maybe reflect upon. On the other hand, of course, in Turkey, we have had many problems recently, and moving away from the EU perspective has not helped us at all. When we look at the situation Turkey is in today, we have deep economic problems, especially exacerbated by this COVID-19 crisis. We have also an unstable political system. We have not yet been able to maybe adapt to the new system. It needs maybe revision. It needs some reforms. We have lost the momentum to make reforms. We have lost this momentum. Of course, we see in Turkey also moves. Turkey is, of course, an important country in this region. We see, for example, the use of these new military. We see improvements in defense industry. We see improvements in industrial strategy. So we cannot say that all that is happening is negative, but we are, I think, lacking a facilitating political and economic environment. So what we need is more democracy, more transparency, more political participation, and less political polarization in Turkey, because I think this polarization is also toxic for the future of Turkey. We are not using our own potential. We are not really trying to bring about the best in us. So I think that's the major thing we have lost together with the EU perspective. So I think we have to go back to that. And if we can go back to that, maybe we can also rekindle Turkey relations. At the moment, there are some issues that may have a potential to be developed between Turkey and the EU, such as the customs union modernization process, the visa liberalization process. However, due to political problems, we cannot really make a start in these issues. There are the issues about democracy, human rights, which is blocking progress, and also foreign policy issues like Turkey's strategy and operations in Syria, in Libya, which are confronting sometimes EU member states' interests. So we have come to a certain process where the only thing that we can talk about between Turkey and the EU is the refugee issue, how we are going to continue this EU-Turkey statement dating back to 2016. Because this is as you have mentioned, a utility-based approach. I mean, the EU needs Turkey's cooperation in dealing with the irregular migration, the refugee issue. That's why maybe it may give Turkey some concessions, but they are only restricted to this issue area, and they do not really have any repercussions on the rest of Turkey relations. So what we need to make any move on this regard will be, of course, Turkey's resolve, Turkey's reform process, more democracy, more human rights. These are very much needed. And even if we actually engage in a reform process, I'm not sure how the EU will be able to respond, because the EU is also involved very much in its internal issues, internal problems. And I think the general mood in the EU at the moment is to actually halt the enlargement process, maybe also let in maybe a few Western Balkan countries, but Turkey at the moment seems like a very big move for the European Union. However, on the other hand, again, the EU needs to engage with Turkey. I mean, it cannot leave Turkey outside. I mean, it needs to have a visible, a feasible strategy against Turkey. It has to be able to cooperate with Turkey. It has to be able to talk with Turkey. We no longer have any institutional framework at the moment where Turkey and the EU can come together. The Association Council cannot meet. The high-level dialogues are suspended because of the Cyprus issue, the drilling activities that Turkey is engaged in Cyprus. So all these geostrategic rivalries, problems are actually blocking any progress in Turkey relations. So I think it is all totally related with how the EU is going to respond to the challenges in its neighborhood. Will it close its borders? Will it really build walls? As, for example, we had this refugee crisis where the Commission's president came and she congratulated the Greek administration, said that you are our shield, our European shield. So a clear demarcation emerged between the EU and Turkey along the Greek borders. So this is not the future that we should hope for. I think rather than confrontation, we need more cooperation, we need more dialogue. We need Turkey to be engaged in the future of the EU, in these new issues like digital transformation, environmental consciousness, etc. But in order to be able to do that, in order for Turkey to be present in the future of Europe, first I think we have to also engage in a really honest, let's say, reformation process inside the country regarding our democracy, our human rights, and this polarization inside our country, which also we see in many other countries around the world, is really not helping the future of Turkey relations.
Thank you very much. That was extremely comprehensive. And all the panelists, I would like to thank, I think we should close in a couple of minutes. Well, Ilke had to leave because I think she just jumped into another one. So she sent her greetings to all of us, all the audience. I think it was extremely informative today. We, unfortunately, there are still many questions that needs to be answered. And as Nicholas rightly pointed out, you know, we need definitely data on that, like cross-sectional, cross-country. It is extremely soon to talk about, like, what is going to happen? Where are we heading to? So at least there are, I think, a lot of food for thought for future debates, right? So I want to thank to all of you that you shared your insights with us, with our students, colleagues, you know, from our university, from different universities. I apologize if we cannot, you know, answer all the questions that had been raised there. Definitely there will be, you know, other occasions that we will put these on the table. So it is still an, you know, ongoing progress and an ongoing process as well. So I want to thank to the Dean, Yavuz Hoca, that he hosts this event at the faculty. Thanks to him, he spent his afternoon with us. You know, I think it was extremely, you know, nice for us to have you here. As for the technical assistance, you know, there's like some people, you know, the invisible people just make it happen. All the technical team. Our you know, assistants Atakan and Çarkan was with us in all the process, so they did a great thing. Thank all of them, and also all the students, graduate students, undergraduate students, the faculty members here and there. You know, I want to thank everyone and Happy Europe Day, and stay well wherever you are, and hope to see on other occasions. Bye guys, bye. And also, last thing is, you know, this applause that comes to all of us. Have a great Saturday. I thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. You too. Bye.